and we're excited about it. But this is our last time to kind of congregate and get together as a community and to get together to focus on who God is. And we worship God in all sorts of different ways. One of the ways I worship God is by listening to Hannah sing and just worshiping through her. But our vision as a church is to build joy-filled communities of faith whose very existence inspires people to live what we call the abundant Christian life. And joy-filled communities, plural, are actually made up of joy-filled individuals. Anyone happy this morning? The 90 game was last week. So we're over that, right? We're moving on. No, we're not moving on. Who's going to watch the Super Bowl next week?
Broncos!
I don't know if I'm going to. I just don't know how I feel about it. I guess I'm a Broncos fan.
Woo.
But joy-filled communities, I'm convinced, are made up of joy-filled individuals. And we as a community of faith, and this is your first time here, we're just ordinary people that are passionate about doing extraordinary things. That are focused on enjoying God and being the living proof of a loving God to our city, to our neighbors, to our friends. And this morning, we're going to talk specifically about community. We're going to talk about what is it like when God builds a community of faith. And what's the result of that? What does it do for us? What does it do for others? What can we expect? What can we be praying about? What can we be excited about as we say, you know what? We want to be an example of the love of God to the city and to everyone around us. So if you have your Bible, I encourage you to pull it out. If you don't have a Bible, we have free ones in the back. Does anyone need one? That's brave enough to raise your hand, because sometimes that can be awkward. But they're free in the back. Say, I've got no problem just walking around. So we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 6 and 7 this morning. But before we dive into the text, I want to be clear. When we open up God's Word, I've just got this belief that God has you here for a reason. Some of you, I talked to this morning already, you were walking by, you saw a sign, and you're like, okay, I'm going to be here. Some of you grew up like me, and you had a drug problem your whole life, right? You were drugged to church on Sundays, you were drugged to church on Sunday nights, you were drugged to church on Wednesdays. And you're like, I haven't been to church forever, but I'm here now. I don't know why I'm here. I feel like I've recovered from my drug addiction, but now I need community. Some of you have a friend that's invited you. Some of you are on our launch team. You're like, Andrew, I'm here. I set up all of that carpet and pipe and drain. You know I'm here. But I'm convinced God has you here for a reason, and I think the reason is He wants to meet with you. He wants to communicate with you. See, I think He's always communicating with us. It's just a matter of are we listening. So this morning, I just believe, and we believe as a church, our source of truth comes from the Bible. So that's why we're going to open up our Bible to 2 Kings chapter 6. And we're going to look at, I think, a unique community. They're not an affinity of 49er fans. There's all sorts of communities in the world. This morning, we're going to look at this unique community in 2 Kings chapter 6. And before we get to 7, which is kind of our main text for the morning, we need a little bit of context as to what's going on. So we're going to go to chapter 6, verse 24. You have notes to follow along in your worship folders as well. But in chapter 6, verse 24, we see the context of this courageous community that God's building. It says this, afterward, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, mustered up his entire army and went and besieged Samaria. Anyone ever been besieged before? Doesn't that just sound awesome? It's not. It's really, really bad. See, the enemy comes, and they come to God's people. Samaria is a group of God's people. It's the Israelites, and they come to God's people, and they're besieging. And a besieging is not like, who here likes Braveheart, Gladiator, those kind of movies? Those are some of my favorite. It's not one of those. It's not like football where people are clashing against each other, and they're fighting. A besieging is when they're going after forfeit, not flames. They're going after famine versus fire. What I mean is, it's a war in super slow motion. The enemy starts to creep into the city, and it gets inch by inch, it gets a little closer, and a little closer, and a little closer. They don't ever fire any shots. There's no yelling and hollering. They just keep creeping in. And then what happens is the people inside Samaria, they can't go anywhere. They're landlocked. They're stuck. They can't get out of their city, and what happens is their circumstances get awful. Famine starts though. In fact, the text says this in verse 25, and there was this great famine in Samaria as they besieged it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of dove's dung, try to say that 5 times fast, was sold for 5 shekels of silver. Now, I don't even know what you use dove's dung for, but I don't use it very often, but it was valuable. It was worth something that, in fact, some commentators think it might have been a vegetable or a type of a vegetable. But a donkey's head was 80 shekels, dove's dung was 5, and the average wage was 1 shekel a month. So if you had 80 months worth of savings, who got that sitting around, right? If you had 80 months worth of savings saved up, you could afford a donkey's head. This is how bad it was. In fact, since there's kids out here, I don't want to share really how bad it was, but if you're curious, you can keep reading in chapter 6, between here and chapter 7, cannibalism was taking place. People were selling their children. Times were awful. Times were bad. People were desperate, and they were looking for hope, and they needed some sort of substance. And they wanted food, but they really wanted life. Is this any way to live? Not for me. Apparently just for the three of us. The rest of you are comfortable living this way? We're not. So the city's under besieging, life is bad, and maybe this morning, no one's firing darts at you. See, I'm hopeful that no one here has someone shooting at them. Anyone have one of those going on? You might not be in war the way that we think of war, but I think many of us walked in this morning under siege. You walked in and there was these circumstances in your life that were going on, and it wasn't anything major, but it was an accumulation of lots of things that were slowly creeping in on you, and you felt like it was sucking the life out of you. Maybe for some of you it's just relationships. Mom and dad just don't understand you. Student, you're not alone. They don't understand you, and you don't understand their love for you. Maybe it's relationships with your parents, relationships with a coworker. Maybe it's your dating life. There are just no good men left in the world anymore. Maybe it's your marriage. You had this marriage and things were going well, but it's not quite living up to the way that you thought it would be. It's not bringing you quite as much joy as you had hoped, and you don't have Prince Charming, and you've not run off into the sunset. Maybe it's your grades. Those teachers are always out to get you. They don't understand that my dog is so evil at eating my homework. And you have that scholarship you're looking for, and it's just not working out for you. Or maybe it came in its financial crisis. There's never enough resources. A donkey's head would be grace right now. Or the IRS is coming, because all of a sudden I'm like, man, it's January? Again? Taxes and audits and all these things. And it's your career that promised hope, but it's really not working out because your boss is hard, or it's your physical body. And this is one of my issues. I'm the oldest young man you'll ever meet. Every day I wake up, I'm like, seriously, something else? Or I race out of the office and I forget something because my mental capacity is kind of going as well. Am I the only one that feels this way? You guys are like, yeah, you're it. Well, for me, I'm under being besieged. And don't even get me started on the economy, because I know the economy's recovering, but I'm like, for who? You see, no one's throwing darts at you, but this morning I'm convinced you came in with all sorts of things that you wish were different. Guess what? You're not alone. That's part of what makes me a joy-filled community of faith, is you start to recognize that these things aren't going to make us as joyful as we will. And my prayer for you this morning as we go to God's Word is we start to say, God, why do you have us in this community? We're not special and unique when things don't go our way. That's kind of life. So would you just pray with me? I have to pray with my hands open, because I just say, Lord, as a physical sign, I want to receive whatever you want. Maybe this morning you don't even know God and you came because your friend said to come, but would you just pray with me and say, God, would you speak to me? Because if you resonate with any of these things, then you'd like to not be under siege. Father God, I just pray right now. Would you just speak to us? Lord, would you remove me from the picture? Would you help me be true to your word? As we open up your word, may we see what you did in this book and how it looks in our town today. Lord, we don't want 2 Kings to be some fabulous story that's informational. Lord, we want it to be transformational for our hearts. So guide us and lead us, Spirit of God. Show us your truth, and may we live differently, more joy-filled because of it. And all his people said, amen. So we're going to dive into chapter 7. In chapter 7, I think we're going to see the most unique community of superheroes ever. If you open up your Bible, 2 Kings in the Old Testament, for me it's on page 374. That means nothing to you probably. But I think it's on page 269. I think it's one of our Bibles that we gave you in the back. We go to chapter 7, and the circumstances are bad. And this is what happens. There were these 4 men who were lepers sitting at the entrance gate. Anyone know what leprosy is? It's a skin disease. Any nurses in the house? We have a few. And back then, leprosy, not only was it not curable, but they became social outcasts. They weren't wanted. No one wanted them in their city. They thought that they would kill them by being around them. They were social outcasts. They were political outcasts. And everything about them was sent out. They were rejected and excluded from the community. Which is kind of how I feel about the Super Bowl right now, right? I'm an outcast. I don't belong. These men are sitting out at the gate, and they're these lepers, and they're on that side of the gate because nobody wants them. And I don't know about you guys, but the Bible doesn't give us names for these guys, but I want to give them some names. So we're going to call them Bill and Ted, because they like excellent adventures. And we're going to call them Harry and Lloyd, because they're going to do some really dumb stuff. So we have these 4 names, and there's these guys who are sitting out the gate, and these are the 4 most unlikely heroes in all of the world, and this is who God's going to use to change a city. And these men are sitting around, and I'm sure they're just shooting the breeze and having these conversations, and then one of them says, hey, all these circumstances, you see those people that keep creeping in on us, and life's not good. And they say this to each other. They say, why are we sitting here until we die? Kind of an obvious question, right? They're wasting away, and they just say, why are we sitting here until we die? See, community back then had something to do with the circumstance. Circumstances were bad, but sometimes community causes us to ask a question that you're not willing to ask yourself. You know, one of those real poignant, specific, in-your-face questions, you're like, hey, would you not ask me that question? Because I'd rather avoid it. Here's what Bill and Ted say to each other. They say, hey guys, what are we doing here? We're wasting away, we're slowly but surely dying, there is no hope for us. Why don't we go do something crazy? Why don't we go to 7-Eleven? And they're just sitting there and they're saying, what are we doing? Because all we're doing is we're going to die. And they ask this hard question. And I think sometimes we need people in our life who are willing to ask the hard question, because we might be avoiding it. So Harry and Lloyd are like, hey, you hear that? They're talking about doing something crazy. They're saying, why are we sitting until we die? Because what are their options right now? Well, let's see what they answer. Verse 4, if we say, let us enter the city, the famine's in the city, and we shall die there. They're actually eating each other inside the city. Or, if we sit here, we're going to die, but just in slow motion. We're just slowly wasting away. Or, so now let us go over to the camp of the Syrians. If they spare our lives, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall die. And this is where I think Harry and Lloyd are going back and forth. They're like, hey, here's the options. If we go backwards, what happens? We die. If we stay here, what happens? We die slower. If we go over there, what are the odds if we go over there that a guy like you and a girl like me, 1 in a million, right? And what does Harry tell Lloyd? So you're saying that, you? What do we got to lose? What do we got to lose? So they say, you know what? If they spare our lives, we shall live. We have nothing to lose. You see, sometimes I'm convinced in our community we need someone who's going to ask the question because we're lacking courage. We're lacking the ability to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to do something that might not make a whole lot of sense, but gosh darn it, this is the best option we have. And don't misunderstand, I don't want to give these lepers too much credit. They're desperate, right? And many of us, we're not desperate, which I think is part of our problem spiritually, is that we're not desperate. Or we just don't realize how desperate we really are. And these lepers, they got nothing better. So they get up and they go. So not only were there circumstances that they asked the question, but they had a focus and a purpose. And they said, let's go to the enemy's camp and let's go. Now, I don't know what this looks like for you guys today. Because that's in 2 Kings. What about today? Because circumstances in life are constantly changing. But I think God grows people and works people's lives through pain and people. We have a commitment as a church of Vintage Grace. We will never do anything on purpose to cause you pain. We will cause you pain at times. By preaching, the carpet won't be the right color, the coffee won't be hot enough. I'm sure we'll do things that cause pain. We won't do it on purpose as a church. But we want to be committed to being a people of God that wants to focus on being on a mission. That wants to focus on God's glory and wants to say, hey, we're going to go for it. We're going to make a difference in people's lives. We're not just going to sit around here and just coast through life. And we're going to be willing to ask the hard questions. Who is that in your life, rhetorically? Who's willing to say, do you see this? Do you see this opportunity? Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your best friend. Maybe it's your kids, because they just are honest with you, right? Dad, do you see what you're missing? Mom, do you see what you're missing? For me, it was my wife. We were in Southern California, and we were pastoring at a church, and we had a great life, and we enjoyed it. And someone came and said, hey, would you consider planting a church in Sacramento? And most of you know the story. What did we say? No. For a year and a half, we said no. Why would we want to leave Southern California? And then I started to realize there's blue skies, and there's stars in Northern California, and there's the Niners and Giants. And I'm like, oh, wait, we can get out of here fast. But I still remember when Jen asked me, why are we not planting a church? And the only answer we had was it'd be easier to stay. It's the only answer we had. So that's not a very good answer. That's not a good answer at all. There's joy to be had in El Dorado Hills. There's an excitement to be had, and you guys are an example of that, of saying, hey, let's go for it. But I remember when my wife asked me that question, why are we not doing this? And I said, I don't want to. I'm looking at you because I blame you for all of this. Lest you don't know, that's my bride. Maybe. As of now, she's my bride. We'll see at the end of the morning. But we need people in our life who are willing to ask the hard questions, and those questions might change our life forever. But are they asking questions about what does God want you to do? Because it's about asking the right questions and encouraging you the right way. And I want to tell you, we want to be a people in a church that have a purpose and a focus. I am so excited and blessed to be part of this community that I call Vintage Grace, corporately, to build joy-filled communities of faith, that we're focusing on, I think, what matters most, which is God's glory. Focusing on Him. We call it R1. And I can tell you guys, we have a team of pastors and leaders that are committed to God's glory above all else. We will not compromise. We'll teach the Word. We'll be focused on it. We will have a plan. And our plan is actually for your joy. And that might sound like we're sellouts. I don't think we are. I think it's how God designed us and wired us to find our joy in Him and to not settle for less. We need a community at times that will point us toward that. That'll say, hey, Mike, you're settling for less of this. You're missing something here. Hey, Rich, there's something better for you. Hey, that choice might not be best. And again, it's got to be the right people. It's got to be those 4 lepers that are sitting around saying, I'm willing to listen to you. Because we don't care people unless we know that they care about us. We don't care what they have to say. What does that community of you? And I don't know what this looks like for you, but some of you, I believe, it's time for you to take that step. And maybe that means it's going back to a spouse that you're not reconciled with. It means going to your kids and saying, I was wrong. Maybe it means joining a church like Vintage Grace, hypothetically. Maybe it means saying, I'm going to reach out to my neighbors. I know their name because we wave at each other, and I know their name by the car they drive. But that garage door is like a tool of the devil that keeps us away from being friends. And that's going to be hard, and you might get rejected at times from your family and your spouse and your neighbors. But God is encouraging you to step out in faith. To say, what is that next step for me? What is that next step for us? Because I think there's great rewards in community when we live life together in the context of community. And I think one of the biggest rewards is just courage. You see, we'll do things. We call that peer pressure in high school, right? We'll do stupid things when people are around us. The positive side of that is actually courage. We're willing to do stuff because we understand that people need us. And it's not because people are needy. Well, actually, we all are needy. Can we just admit that and get that out of the way now? We're all needy. But Hannah's got a skill set that I don't have, and Jeff's got a bicep that I don't have, and Matthew's got something I don't have, and God's put us in this context of community because we actually need each other. And what happens is we start to recognize we're willing to do things that we didn't think we were willing to do because we're not doing it alone. We joke as a launch team, none of them thought they were playing at church last year. But they are. God's doing something as they've stepped out in faith. Because I don't have to. When we step out in faith, what happens is we got these blinders on our life. And all we can see is me, myself, and I. Or maybe it's my kids. Maybe it's my job. And we get so focused on the minutia of our life that we need someone to come alongside us. Would you grab my arm for me, Kelsey? And you have to pull. Chris? We need someone to open up, because there's all these people here. We get so focused, I think we have blinders on. And sometimes it doesn't just take one person. I wasn't setting Kelsey up just because she's like a third of my size. We need people that come alongside of us and say, hey, take the blinders off. I know you're afraid, I know you're fearful, but God's got a plan for you in this. Let's go back to the text, verse 5. So what did these guys do? They arose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. But when they came to the edge of the camp of the Syrians, behold, no one was there. And this is like, we need to make a movie. In fact, Josh, is he not here? Okay, so we'll just tell Josh when he's back with Ben. We're going to make a Vintage Grace movie like this. But can you imagine what this looks like? These 4 lepers, and we don't know how far it is that they travel, because the Bible doesn't tell us, but they're traveling, and they get to this point, and they come up this ridge, is kind of how I see it playing out, and they get here, and they're like, only one of them had the idea to go over there. The other 3 thought he was done. Like, okay, come on guys, let's go. And they finally get to the edge of the camp, and they're like looking over. And I can picture Harry telling Lloyd, because it was Lloyd's idea, it was somewhere in the ESV, I'm sure. So it's Lloyd's idea. So Lloyd's like, come on guys, let's go. They're like, no, you go by yourself. They're going to kill us. So Lloyd comes up to the crest, and he looks over, and he's like, dude, nobody's there. And you know what the rest of them are saying, right? Okay, you just keep going. We're going to wait here. Right? Because it's like a trap. They're just hiding for him. And they keep going and they go down to the thing and no one was there. Why? Because the Lord had made an army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and of horses and the sound of a great army. So they said to one another, behold, these are the bad guys. Behold, the king of Israel hired against us the king of the Hittites and the king of Egypt to come against us. And they take off in the twilight and they abandon their tents and their horses and their donkeys, leaving the camp as it was, and they fled for their lives. So Harry and Lloyd come over the crest, and they're like, guys, no one's here. And Bill and Ted are like, hey, we didn't sign up for this, dude. Like, there's still horses, there's still things. Like, they're just waiting to slaughter us. This is a joke to them. That's what they're taking to Harry and Lloyd. But they keep going. And when the lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into the tent, and they ate, and they drank, and nobody killed them. It was pretty awesome. Remember how dire their circumstances were. What would that feel like? What would it be like to go from having nothing and wasting away to having everything? See, I think this is what we call salvation. When we go from having nothing to actually having everything. And these lepers discover this, and they discover the rewards of community. They walk into this tent with my Lego figurines here, and they discover treasure and joy and riches unheavenly. They go, this is incredible. This is incredible, incredible, incredible. And that's what they experienced because they were a community that asked a hard question and that got up and did something about it. So I don't know what that looks like now for you guys. You and Jesus know that. And I've asked for God to be talking to you through this text so that you might see that your fear does make sense. Make no mistake, they might go to that camp of the enemy and they might be slaughtered. You might go to that person and try to restore a relationship and get rejected. Your fear makes sense, kind of. Because Romans says it this way, if my God is for us, then what? Who can be against us? Answer being emphatically, nobody. Nobody. So sure, your fear makes sense, kind of. But in God's sovereignty and God's control, there is nothing going on in your life right now that He's not aware of and is actually playing a role in. For your good. For your joy. That includes the lawyers, that includes the car accident, that includes the marriage. All of it. All of it. Another benefit